welcome to GameSack. And that's all we've got. Thanks for watching.
You're a joker.
Just kidding. We're talking about the Analogue NT Mini, another NES. I don't want to call it a clone style system.
No,
but
it's a retro style system that plays actual game cartridges.
Indeed. And this is, if you thought $185 for the AVS was too much, then this is the system for you, because it costs $450, $500 for the black version.
Yep.
I mean, you don't want to be caught spending only $185 on an NES console. You want to spend upwards of $500. Here we go.
Yeah, why not?
And where does this money go? So let's take a look. This is the Analogue NT Mini. Your system arrives in a fancy box which is surprisingly heavy. That's because the system itself is really heavy despite being so small. It's built like a tank. Also inside the box is an HDMI cable, a USB cable, a power supply with adapters for any country, and a wireless controller. More on that one later. The console itself is made out of a solid block of 6061 aluminum, contains a very powerful 32-bit Altera Cyclone 5 FPGA, and is compatible with both NTSC and PAL formats. In addition to outputting video and sound over HDMI, you can also output both via analog means. You can get composite NES video, component, and RGB adapter cables for the system. There's also a microphone input so you can shout at those bastard Pols voices in the Japanese version of The Legend of Zelda. There's even a Famicom expansion port for those special peripherals. Also on the back is a USB slot for charging your controller and the console's power button. On the left side of the system is the SD card slot, which not only enables firmware updates, but other fun things. On the front of the system, you get not 1, not 2, not 3, not 5, not 20, but 4 controller ports. And on the right side of the system, you get nothing. Absolutely nothing. The console itself weighs a hefty 31.6 ounces, just shy of 2 pounds. Like I said barely even a minute ago, it's built like a tank and feels anything but cheap. Hell, I wish all consoles were made so durably. I like the shape of the system as well, nice and sleek. Of course, it's up to you if you prefer the light gray or the black version.
As you probably already know, the Analogue NT Mini has slots for both NES and Famicom cartridges. But what's the fun in plugging a Japanese game into the Famicom slot when you can plug the cartridge into an adapter, plug that into a Game Genie, and then plug the whole thing into the NES slot? Way better! On a serious note, don't plug in both Famicom and NES carts in at the same time though. It'll also work with a Famicom disk system if you have one. To power up this system, you hold down the red power button for about half of a second. You can tell when it's powered on by breaking out your binoculars and witnessing the world's tiniest LED light on the front. You're taken into the menu where you have a lot of things that you can choose from. The first option is Run Cartridge, which of course runs the game you've inserted. We'll talk about the other options later, but first let's get into the settings. Under Video, you tell it what resolution you want. The NT Mini thankfully defaults to 1080p, but you can change that to 720p or even 480p if you like. You can change the height and position. 4 times scales the original image exactly 4 times, so what was originally 1 pixel is now 4 pixels high. This only affects the height and not the width of the screen. Under Width and Position, you can stretch the screen to your liking. At 525, it says 4x3 for 16:9. It's not really a perfect 4x3 shape though, as it depends on your height settings as well. So you're still left to guess what's exactly the right shape for the screen. You can also crop the borders of the image if you like. And there's even so-called scaling features. These are like filters and emulators which give the image a weird, smoothed out look. Or a very nasty look. I mean, why is this one even here? Would you use this? Like anyone would enjoy playing a game like this. Ugh. You can select how the sync is handled on the RGB analog out. And you can select from a few different color palettes or even load your own. And yes, you can apply fake scanlines to the video to make the pixels seem less harsh if you like. Choose the original option so it's sized correctly to your resolution. These scanlines look alright, I guess. But honestly, we've never really seen fake scanlines provided by a system like this that we truly love though. They seem kind of thin here. Over in the audio, you can adjust the volume of each and every sound channel and even the panning so you can get some fake stereo in your NES games. Under the system settings, you can adjust various things like the front LED light. You can even have it constantly pulsating. I mean, if you're easily entertained, this setting is for you. Other settings let you disable EDID, which might mess up your video if you don't know what you're doing, or enabling DVI. You can also tell the system if you're using 2 controllers, a 4-score, or the Famicom 4-player adapter. You have a choice of 8 or 16 sprites per scanline, just like the Retro USB AVS. But many games are designed to use 8 sprites, so setting it to 16 might not help. Lastly, you have the startup settings. Here you can tell the system to go straight to the game inserted when powered on, to the menu, or to the Analogue logo and then the menu. There's lots of options here to let you tweak your experience like crazy.
Thanks to the standard NES controller ports, you can use any NES-compatible controller to play your games. It works well and it's my preferred method. Unlike the AVS though, this system comes with a 8-bit DOE wireless controller. It's built like an NES controller but has all of the buttons of a Super Nintendo pad. The shoulder buttons are kind of weird, but they're usable. It's not like any 8-bit Nintendo games use them though. To use this controller, you just plug the receiver into a controller port, sync them, and voila! The controller lasts about 20 hours before you're going to need to recharge it with the included USB cable. You can take the included USB cable and attach one end to the controller receiver and the other end to the console itself. When you do this, nothing happens at all, so don't do this. I couldn't feel any lag due to the wirelessness, but of course I didn't expect any. It works well, but I still prefer the original controller. And as a bonus, the 8-bit DOE receiver will sync up to a Wii Remote, a PS3 controller, and a PS4 controller, maybe even more. That's right, now you can play your NES games with a PS4 controller. This is also very responsive and a good thing if you like the feel of a PlayStation controller. As you'd expect, you can take the receiver and plug it into a real NES and play using a wireless controller like the PS4. But you didn't pay $450 or more to do that, so you're probably not going to. But the 8-bit DOE controller and receiver are sold on their own, so you can get them without getting an NT Mini. You know what doesn't work? Neo Geo joysticks. I mean, it fits. I blame Nintendo for designing their Neo Geo controller port wrong. Honestly, you can't blame Analogue. There's also no place to plug in my sweet Saturn 6-button controller. Seriously though, the biggest problem with the control ports on the NT Mini is that they feel extremely tight. It's difficult to insert controllers and even more difficult to remove them. However, inserting and removing cartridges is easy. There are nice flaps to keep the dust out, and this is cool. I like cartridge flaps, you should too. Hell, we should start a cartridge flap fan club, and they won't leave any scratches or marks on your precious cartridges. However, the NES carts like to lean and they're not tremendously secure. If you bump it during gameplay or the wind blows, your game could get messed up and glitch out. I'm not sure why the wind would be blowing in your game room, but you've been warned. Also, when you remove an NES cartridge, be sure to pull it straight up and not out at an angle, otherwise it might catch on the corner.
As far as running games goes, the Analogue NT Mini advertises being compatible with 100% of the NES and Famicom library. The FPGA thinks it's a real NES and they didn't take any shortcuts designing it like many emulators or clone systems do. Analogue says the timing and everything is exactly like the original system. So far as we can tell, that pretty much seems to be the case. Everything we've thrown at it plays just like it would on a real system. Depending on how you have the video scaled, you may see some shimmering in the scrolling, but it's not distracting or anything. If you want to get rid of it completely, set both the height and the width to perfectly round numbers, like 4x height and 5x width. The graphics all have the same glitches as they do when they run on the original NES or Famicom. The audio is very authentic as well, and it sounds great. Extra audio chips in certain Famicom carts are great, but you have to enable them yourself. You have to go into the volume menu and turn up the cartridge audio volume to a level that seems good to you. Or you can just keep it all the way down and go into the expansion audio chips menu and enable the chip that your cart uses. The audio will suddenly be there. This is emulated by the FPGA, but it sounds pretty damned accurate. Weirdly, if you put the Famicom cart onto an NES adapter and plug it into the NES slot, the external audio can't be heard. Even if your adapter is modified to pass the audio through, the external audio just isn't there on the NES slot at all. However, you can still engage the audio expansion chip in the menu and it'll play just fine. The NT Mini works with unlicensed games, multi-carts, and all that stuff. It doesn't dump the ROM from the cartridge before it plays like the Retron 5 does. That means you can even use an EverDrive and other NES flash cards. In fact, if you have an EverDrive, then playing Famicom Disk System games suddenly becomes even more awesome. With the EverDrive on a normal NES, you either hear no extra sound or poor extra sound. The EverDrive does a pretty bad job mimicking the Disk System's sound chip. But you can just turn it on in the audio expansion menu and bam! Famicom Disk System Enhanced Audio. It doesn't sound like it has a low-pass filter on it like the real hardware does, but that's fine with me. Not every disc game supports this, but those that do can finally be played without needing to own a real Famicom Disk System. You can access the menus during a game by pressing down and select at the same time, and you get back to the game by simply pressing select. You can change which button combinations trigger this and other events in the menu. One thing to note about the Analogue NT Mini is that your cartridge needs to be clean. Damn clean. I often found that it would boot into a blue screen, meaning that it can't see the game properly. Sometimes I got a glitchy screen. I was able to eventually get most games working, but it's a lot more sensitive than my real NES in regards to cleanliness. It can be pretty frustrating sometimes, as even games I got working on the system won't work again the next day without another cleaning. And even then, you need to slightly adjust some games so that the console will read it properly. This is my biggest complaint about this system. But when it works awesomely. If you're gonna spend the cash on this system, it's likely that you already take pretty damn good care of your NES games. Of course, there's built-in Game Genie support for all you cheaters out there. Unfortunately, save states are not supported and are not currently planned. The system's designer says it would take a huge amount of work to implement, if it's even possible at all. Alright, now that we've had some hands-on time with this thing, Joe, what do you think so far?
I think it's an interesting system, Dave, but there's still more to discuss. So
that's true.
Let's get back into it. Like Dave said, the HDMI video output looks fantastic in 1080p, but the console can output analog video as well, and it also looks fantastic. If you hook it up with composite, you'll get the same shimmering artifacts that you would with a real NES hooked up in composite. Look at all that shimmering nastiness. Though I bet some of you have some nostalgia for that. But for people like me who can't stand that, hooking up the console and RGB component or hell even S-Video will get rid of this. Analogue advertises this system as having absolutely no lag at all, none. If you experience any lag, then it's something that your TV is doing. And I've got to say that I sure as hell don't notice any lag. Here you see me making Mario jump on a CRT monitor connected via the Analogue RGB out. This is the same amount of lag that you'd experience on a real NES, none. And here I am making Mario jump on my LCD connected via HDMI. There's also the 240p Test Suite ROM, which has a mode for checking lag. Here I'm supposed to press the button when I see the two images line up. I'm usually within 3 frames, and being an imprecise human being adds to that a little, I suspect. Running this same test on an LCD yields near identical results. Hell, I might even be a little better than I was on the CRT. Unfortunately, the Analogue NT Mini can't output both analog and digital video at the same time, so there's no way to put a CRT next to an LCD monitor to give it the true test. Oh, and since you can play on a CRT, Zapper games like Duck Hunt and others work perfectly fine. As far as I know, this is the only FPGA console capable of playing light gun games. It still doesn't work on an LCD, but if you have a CRT handy, at least you can play and enjoy them. Overall, the RGB image coming from this console looks outstanding. I mean, look at those real scan lines on my CRT. Not sure if you can see them well enough. Let's get closer. Good, though still not enough. Okay, this is better, but it's still not close enough to be truly appreciated. Oh yeah, there we go. Look at those awesome, unrecognizable pixels. Isn't this the most amazing, jumbly, incomprehensible mess that you've ever seen? In all seriousness though, the CRT output options look superb. No complaints at all.
The Analogue NT Mini is capable of a lot of different things. Right on the home screen you have the NSF Player. What the hell is an NSF? Well, it's an NES sound file. This means that you can listen to the music of your favorite titles without having to play the game. Just download NSF files from the internet or make your own and store them on an SD card in a folder called NSF and you're good to go. It'll play files that use the enhanced sound chips like the Japanese version of Castlevania 3, Lagrange Point, or even Famicom Disk System games. I've never seen an NSF for a Famicom Disk System game though. This is fun to mess around with as most NES games don't have sound tests. What's really interesting is the evil pirate jailbroken firmware created by a gentleman going by the alias of Kevtris. You can tell when you're using the evil firmware because it has skulls, and skulls are evil and cool. I like skulls. Am I evil? His firmware updates are not official, but they are supported by Analogue, who has their own firmware updates, so go figure. Kevtris's firmware overwrites Analogue's but has all of the same features, but with more. Keep in mind that anytime you update or overwrite the firmware, you have to reset everything from your video settings to startup mode and all that. For one, his firmware allows you to rip your own NES carts into a ROM. Why you'd want to do this, I don't know, but choose the correct mapper and rip away. But even better is Kevtris's evil firmware allows you to play ROMs off of an SD card via dedicated system cores. We recommend that only criminals do this. You can rip and play your own carts or get your ROMs in some other nefarious way. Playing NES ROMs is a lot of fun. It's easy to select a new game, just press down and select. The new game loads up fast and before you know it, you're playing. It'll even play games with the external sound chip enabled, like the aforementioned Lagrange Point. Now you can play it and hear the special audio without needing the Famicom card. This is an RPG set in space, and yeah, maybe I'll let Joe cover this sometimes because he likes RPGs a lot more than I do. You can also finally experience the extra sound that's in Gimmick just as long as you're not playing the European ROM. Here's what the game sounds like to most people. And here's what it sounds like on the NT Mini. This should also work if you have a physical reproduction copy of the game. Just enable the Sunsoft 5B chip in the menu. Or how about Rolling Thunder? Yeah, we all know this game from Tengen, but did you know the Japanese version uses a special audio chip? The difference isn't outstanding or anything, but I'm just amazed that Namco even bothered to do anything special with the audio. Take a listen to the difference. While the NES core here uses a lot of what's already written into the NT Mini, the emulation might not always seem spot on. This is because the NES core needs to emulate all of the thousands of different mappers that the NES games use, whereas the real NES games take care of that directly in the cartridge. So games like Star Tropics, for example, might seem to be messed up and not have any sound, but if you download the correct ROM with a header, it'll work perfectly fine. It still supports more mappers than an EverDrive, and it doesn't half-ass anything here. There's also a cord that lets you play Gameboy games. You can make these fill almost the entire height of the screen, and they all play pretty damn well. It looks super pixelated, but of course that's to be expected. It's all green tinted like the original Game Boy, and there's no option to make it perfectly monochrome. Like this, for example. Of course, that's just some editing for effect. I'd like it if that were available, and if the system could save my preferences for that, I'd be grateful. If you're gonna do Game Boy, you might as well have a Game Boy Color core as well. Well, it's here for most of your Game Boy Color needs. Supposedly, this core is still kind of buggy, but all the games I tried seem to run pretty well. Again, it's very pixely, but since the games are in color, it looks better than the regular Game Boy. Did you know there was a version of Rayman on the Game Boy Color? Don't get your hopes up too high, as it's far from outstanding. The biggest problem with these games is that some are very large and take a super long time to load. Still, it's fun to try out a lot of these games. And now I can in 1080p, just like the original designers meant for them to be played.
But that's not all. Kevtris plans to release cores for a bunch of different 8-bit systems, like the ColecoVision. It's really fun playing all of these old games in HDMI glory. The ColecoVision was pretty damn good for its time when it came to graphics. It's just too bad that the controllers sucked. Speaking of which, trying to play some of these games with an NES pad can be troublesome as there just aren't enough buttons. Some games I can't even start because there's no button on the pad which will start the game for me. There's also a core for the Sega Master System. I originally had a hard time getting this to work, but you've got to make sure that you have good ROMs. But even then, not all games worked. And it's definitely kind of weird playing my favorite Master System games with an NES controller. But honestly, it's not bad at all if I use a PlayStation 4 pad. You can enjoy PSG sound, or you can enable FM sound for games that support it. Now people can play great games like Consaden on their HD TVs with crystal clarity. This is a fantastic game that more people should play. Oops. So yeah, now people can play great games like Wonder Boy and Monsterland. This is a fantastic game that more people should play. So yeah, the emulation isn't quite perfect yet for each game, but most games play fine, and the ones that don't can be fixed in future updates. What's sad is that light phaser games don't work, even when played on a CRT. Yeah, the Zapper is a bit lower tech than the light phaser, so I'm not really surprised. But this problem may be solved in the future because Kevtris has said he'd like to make available controller adapters so we can use original controllers like the Light Phaser or a ColecoVision controller or what have you. In addition to that, he wants to make cartridge adapters available so you can plug in your own Master System or Atari or whatever console cartridges and play them directly. Anyway, back to the cores. Along with Master System compatibility comes the SG1000. This was Sega's very first console and was released only in Japan. As a system, it's very similar to the ColecoVision as far as hardware goes. It can be fun to compare some of these to the ColecoVision version of the same exact game. So you tell us, which version of Zaxxon here do you think looks better? One is more detailed and choppy, and the other is smoother yet a lot more sparse. Still, it's really fun to try out a lot of these titles and see some Sega history in the process. Even more fun is the Sega Game Gear core. That's right, now you can finally get your Game Gear on in full 1080p glory. Many of these games are tons of fun, especially since you don't have to look at the original system's horribly blurry and dim screen. Set the scaling all the way to a perfect 5x, the width to exactly 6x, and it's pretty damn nice. Not full screen, but pretty good looking regardless. The fake scan lines can even look good in this mode, like in Axe Battler here. Oh, and hey, did you notice there was a Phantasy Star game called Phantasy Star Gaiden? This was, of course, only released in Japan, but now you can play through the English translated version on your HD TV in 1080p using a console primarily designed to play Nintendo games. Games that support save RAM are supported in each and every one of these cores. And there's lots more systems that will be supported in the future using these cores. This might make up for needing excessively clean cartridge pins if you can just run the ROM, but that's up to you. I like the NES a lot, but honestly, I had a lot more fun playing around with the extended abilities of the system provided by Kevtris, who I assume is a being created by surgically combining Kevin and Tetris.
Alright everybody, there you go. There's the Analogue NT Mini for you. I hope we gave you enough information on this thing so you can make an educated guess on if you want to buy this or you pass on it or whatever. But personally, I think it's cool. I don't think it's a blue-collar guy's machine based on the price tag alone. I think you're going to have a hard time finding somebody who wants to pay that much money for it, even though I think it is kind of worth it. The output is awesome. The video looks great. The audio is awesome. It's an all-around cool piece of machinery. But one thing that I would like to just note is looking at the old top loader NES, because both cartridges go on face up. This one is built up a little bit higher. So the cartridge, I mean, while it wobbles a little bit, it doesn't wobble nearly as much as this thing. So maybe Analogue, in your future attempts, maybe you could have something a little bit more like that to keep stabilization in the cartridge. Joe?
Thank you. I'm allowed to talk now.
Yes.
I do like the Analogue NT. Like Dave said in the when we were doing the overview and stuff like that, it is kind of hard to get some of the cartridges to work. A lot of mine worked right away, no problem. Some of them needed a lot of cleaning and stuff like that. It's kind of finicky that way. Famicom carts seem a little bit more reliable. The output options are just tremendous. I love it being able to output analog and S-video, RGB, everything that you could possibly want.
Right.
So it's a really cool machine. I'm really blown away about what they did in here, and I like being able to play all the ROMs, and I look forward to seeing what else they can do with it.
Yeah, me too.
So what do you guys think of the Analogue NT Mini? Is it something you would buy? I mean, is it something you'd even consider? Would you rather get a retro USB AVS? And, let us know what you think. In the meantime, thank you for watching GameSack.
Hey everybody, it's the Exasperated Gamer back here with you again with another review. This time I'm taking a look at the Analogue NT Mini system. Are there any games around here to play? Blaster Master, this game is ass. Dr. Mario, this game is kinda ass. Akumaju Densetsu, ass. Green Dog for the Sega Genesis, much ass. Bonk's Adventure for the TurboGrafx 16, ass. Silent Hill for the PlayStation,
so much ass! Radiant Silvergun for the Sega Saturn. Ass-tastic! Neo Turf Masters for the Neo Geo. 133 megs of ass! Alright guys, there you go. The exasperated gamers played this system, and you know what? It plays nothing but ass games.
Ass.
So therefore I've got to give it an ass rating.